My name is Brooke, and on the night of October 16, 2023, at exactly 11:30 p.m., I discovered something that should not have been there. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the air hangs still and thick with the quiet of the night. The house, old and full of history, creaked in familiar ways. I had become accustomed to the gentle sounds of this house, the way the floors groaned with age and the way the wind whispered through the trees outside. But that night, the air felt different. There was something in it that I could not ignore. I had been living in this house for nearly a year now, and in that time, I had learned to love its charm. A Victorian home built in 1886, it was a house full of stories and history. But it was also a house that held its secrets. For months, I had walked past the same rooms, seen the same views through the windows, and spent nights under the same roof. It had always felt like home, until that night. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I happened to glance outside my bedroom window. The fog was rolling in from the forest behind the house, thick and damp, swallowing the garden below. The fog blocked the moonlight, and for a moment, everything outside appeared to vanish into an eerie, suffocating darkness. But something stood out in that darkness. A grave. At first, I could not believe what I was seeing. A grave. How had it appeared there? I had spent countless evenings in this room, looking out this very window, and I had never noticed it. The stone was old, weathered by time, and stood just outside my window, partially hidden by overgrown ivy. The rest of the yard, neglected and wild, had always felt forgotten, but this gravestone, was different. It felt intentional, as though it had been placed there for a reason. I had lived in this house for months and had never seen this grave. It had not been there before. It could not have been. So, why now? Why had I never noticed it until tonight? I stared at the stone for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of it. The symbols carved into it were unfamiliar, and the date engraved was old, much older than the house itself. It seemed out of place, as though it did not belong in the yard, but rather in some forgotten corner of time. Who had buried someone here? Why had they chosen this spot, right outside my window? And why had I never seen it before? The more I stared at the grave, the more I felt the weight of something unseen pressing against me. The grave felt like a secret waiting to be uncovered. But what was it trying to tell me? Why had it been hidden for so long? And more terrifyingly, why was it now revealed to me, at this moment? There was something about that grave. Something that did not belong. Something that was meant to stay buried. And yet, here it was, uncovered and staring back at me, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. I knew I had to find out more. I could not ignore it. But at the same time, I could not shake the feeling that this was a discovery I was never meant to make. If you want to know the truth behind the grave outside my window, like this video and subscribe. Let me know where you are watching from, and stay tuned for the next part. The story is just beginning, and the answers may be more frightening than you think. I could not get the image of that grave out of my mind. It felt like it was staring at me, even when I closed my eyes. I lay awake for hours, the weight of the night pressing down on me, my thoughts tangled with questions I could not answer. Why had it appeared there, right outside my window? Why had I never noticed it before? The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. I knew I had to find answers, but something inside me told me to leave it alone. Some secrets are meant to stay hidden, I thought. But I could not shake the feeling that this grave was not just a forgotten part of the yard. It was something more, something I was meant to uncover. The next morning, I forced myself to get out of bed, the fog still hanging in the air. It was a typical morning for the house, quiet, still, with the faint creaking of the old beams overhead. I walked over to the window, my heart pounding in my chest, and looked outside. The grave was still there. Its presence seemed even more unsettling in the daylight, its sharp edges illuminated by the weak morning light. I could see the symbols more clearly now, though they still made no sense. They were strange, almost foreign, like nothing I had ever seen. The stone itself was weathered, cracked in places, and the dirt around it seemed freshly disturbed, though the rest of the yard remained wild and untended. I knew I had to go outside and take a closer look. The thought made my stomach tighten. Part of me wanted to turn away, to forget about the grave, but the other part of me was driven by something I could not explain. It was as if the grave was calling to me, urging me to uncover its secrets. I pulled on my jacket and stepped out into the yard. The cool morning air hit me, sharp and refreshing, but it did little to calm the unease that had settled deep within me. I walked slowly toward the grave, my boots crunching on the dry ground beneath me. The closer I got, the more I could feel it, a strange, heavy presence in the air. It felt like I was not alone, like the grave was watching me, waiting for me to get closer. I stopped just short of the stone, staring down at the symbols carved into it. They were intricate, but they did not make sense. I tried to make out the shape of each symbol, but they seemed to blur together, like a language that I had no understanding of. I reached out to touch the stone, but my hand stopped just inches away. Something in the back of my mind told me that if I touched it, I would awaken something that had been buried for a reason. I could not ignore the feeling that the grave was tied to the house in some way. The house that had welcomed me, the house that had seemed so warm and comforting at first, now felt like a place full of hidden darkness. I walked around the grave, scanning the ground, looking for any other signs of something buried there, but the ground was undisturbed except for the grave itself. There was something else, too. A strange noise, almost like the faintest of whispers, seemed to rise from the earth beneath the grave. I stopped in my tracks, listening. The whispering stopped the moment I turned to look, leaving me standing in the silence of the yard, with nothing but the heavy air and the growing unease. I stepped back, my breath coming faster now. It was as if the grave was challenging me, daring me to uncover its secrets. I could not explain why, but I knew something was wrong. The more I looked at it, the more it felt like this grave had been placed for a reason I had yet to understand. Who had put this grave here, and why had it been hidden from me all this time? What was the purpose of the strange symbols? And what did it mean that the grave seemed to be calling me, drawing me in, making it impossible to ignore? These were questions I could not ignore. I could not ignore the feeling that I was on the edge of something much larger than I had first imagined. The grave, that strange stone outside my window, had started to feel like an omen, a puzzle with pieces scattered around the house, waiting to be put together. I had already spent days looking for answers, but each time I thought I had found one, I only uncovered more questions. What was it about this grave that kept pulling me back? Why had it suddenly appeared? The air in the house felt thicker now, heavier. Every room seemed to hum with the tension, like the walls themselves were watching me. After the strange encounter at the grave, I could not shake the thought that the house itself was hiding something. It was as if the grave was a part of a much bigger story, one that had been buried long ago, forgotten by time but not by the house. I spent the next few days trying to ignore the unease that gnawed at me, but I could not get the feeling out of my mind. I had to know what was behind it. I had to understand why the grave was there, just outside my window, so close, so impossible to ignore. I decided to go through the attic. It was a place I had not visited often, filled with boxes and old furniture covered in dusty sheets. It had always seemed like a place for forgotten things, but I had a feeling that there might be something there, something that could explain the strange events happening around the house. I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, the floorboards creaking under my weight, and made my way to the farthest corner, where I noticed a box that seemed out of place. It was old, the wood worn and scratched from years of neglect. It sat there, tucked behind a stack of old books and forgotten memories, as if waiting for me. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid of the box. Inside, there were a few old photographs, a collection of letters tied with twine, and something else, something that caught my attention immediately. It was a journal, weathered and cracked, its leather cover stained with age. The moment I touched it, I felt the chill run through my fingers, as if the journal itself was aware of my presence. I opened it slowly, the pages stiff from years of being untouched, and began to read. The journal belonged to a man named Elias, a previous occupant of the house. As I flipped through the pages, I learned that he had lived in this very house long before I had arrived. His writings were scattered with strange accounts, talk of unusual occurrences, inexplicable events that seemed to happen more frequently as time went on. But the most disturbing part of the journal was the mention of a grave. Elias had written about a grave that had been placed just outside the window, a grave that seemed to hold something, or someone, long forgotten. The more I read, the clearer it became that Elias had known about the grave. He had even mentioned the strange symbols that were etched into the gravestone, describing them as warnings from the past. He wrote that the house had a way of drawing people in, binding them to its history. It seemed that whatever was buried outside my window was not just a random grave, it was part of a much larger, more dangerous story. The more I read, the more I felt a sense of dread settle in my chest. Elias had left behind a warning, something about the curse that the grave represented, something that was not meant to be disturbed. I closed the journal and stood up, my heart racing. It was as if the house itself had wanted me to find it, to piece together the truth hidden within these pages. I could feel the weight of it all, how connected the house, the grave, and Elias's story were. But there was still so much I did not understand. Who had put that grave outside my window? Why had Elias written about a curse tied to it? And why had the house been so eager to show me this journal now? I had more questions than answers, but one thing was certain, I had to learn everything I could about this grave, about the curse, and about the house that had been holding these secrets for so long. Something was coming, something connected to the grave, and I was not sure if I was ready for it. But I could not turn back now. That if you want to know what happens next, what I discover when I go deeper into the mystery of the grave and what the curse really means, like this video and subscribe. The journal had opened a door. I had been unable to stop thinking about what I had read. Elias's words echoed in my mind, repeating over and over like a warning. The symbols on the gravestone, the mention of a curse, the whispers of something dark that had been hidden beneath the earth. It felt as though the house had been watching me all along, waiting for me to uncover its secrets. But what was I meant to do with what I had learned? The journal told me that the grave outside my window was part of something much larger, a story that went back generations, but there were still so many pieces missing. I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. It started subtly at first, the sensation of eyes on me even when I was alone in my room. But then, it became impossible to ignore. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the horizon and the sky darkened into night, I heard a sound. At first, it was barely noticeable, a faint scratching, like something dragging along the wall. I froze, listening. The sound continued, slow and deliberate, as if something was testing my reaction. I sat up, trying to figure out where it was coming from, my heartbeat quickening with each passing moment. I stood up and walked toward the window, the cold air from outside creeping in as I pushed it open. I leaned out, trying to see through the fog that had settled over the yard. It was thick, almost suffocating, but I could make out the outline of the grave just a few feet away. It stood there, as it always did, the stone now almost glowing in the pale light of the moon. I tried to shake the unease that gripped me. There was nothing unusual about the grave. Nothing but the fog. But then I saw it. A figure, just barely visible in the mist. It was standing near the grave, watching me. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, a shadow created by the fog. But as I blinked and focused, the figure became clearer. A man. Tall, dressed in clothes from a time long past. His face was obscured, but the outline of his form was unmistakable. He stood motionless, as though he had been waiting there for me to notice him. The chill in the air deepened as my heart raced. I could feel my breath catch in my throat. What was he doing out there? Why did he look so familiar? I had not seen him before, but somehow, I knew he was connected to the grave. I stepped back from the window, my mind racing with questions. Was this a ghost? Was this the restless spirit Elias had written about in his journal? The feeling of dread grew stronger, and the air around me seemed to thicken. I knew I should not have looked away, but I could not bring myself to glance back out the window. The figure was gone. The silence that followed felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. My thoughts spun in 1,000 directions. Who was that figure? Was it the spirit of the person buried outside my window? And why did I feel like I had just crossed a line I could not return from? I spent the rest of the night awake, lying in bed, the image of that figure burned into my mind. It was as if I had seen something I was never meant to witness. The grave, the curse, and now the figure. All of it was too much to ignore, but I did not know what to do next. The house had always felt old, full of mystery, but now it felt alive, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Something was coming. Something connected to the grave outside. But I could not shake the question that had been haunting me: what did the figure want from me? The days following the discovery of Elias's journal passed in a blur, my mind constantly returning to the grave outside my window. I could not shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a weight pressing down on me. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I could no longer walk through the house without feeling a strange tension in the air, as though I was being watched. Every night, as the darkness settled in, I found myself drawn back to the window. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just the natural creep of an old house and the fog that often rolled in from the woods. But something in me knew better. The grave, those strange markings, the symbols that seemed to warn me, it all felt like a puzzle I could not escape from. I had to know more, but I did not know where to start. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I was sitting in my room, reading through the journal again, when I heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from outside, at first so subtle that I thought it was the wind against the window. But then it grew louder, deliberate, as if someone, or something, was dragging its fingers along the stone. My heart raced, my throat tight. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had started, leaving behind an unnerving silence. I stood up, my body already tense, and slowly made my way to the window. The fog had begun to roll in again, thick and low, curling around the yard like a creeping shadow. But then, through the mist, I saw him. A figure standing by the grave, just outside my window. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fog, but as my eyes focused, I could make out the shape of a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing clothing that seemed out of place. His back was to me, and he stood perfectly still, as if waiting for something. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. There was no movement, just the figure standing motionless in the yard, framed by the fog. I felt a coldness wash over me, something deeper than the chill of the night air. I could not move. Could not speak. The figure seemed to be there, just for me, standing silently in the shadows. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was someone walking through the yard, a neighbor, or a passerby. But the more I tried to make sense of it, the more the feeling of dread grew. There was something wrong about the way he stood there, so still, so unnatural. I strained my eyes to see more, but before I could gather the courage to pull the curtain back further, the figure was gone. I rushed outside to check, my heart pounding in my chest. The air outside was thick with fog, but there was no trace of anyone. No footprints, no signs of anyone walking near the grave. It was as if the figure had never been there at all. But I knew what I had seen. I had felt it. The grave, the presence of someone standing there, it was too real to ignore. I stood there, frozen, wondering if I had just imagined the whole thing. But the cold, the lingering sensation that I was not alone, told me otherwise. The house was hiding something, and I was getting closer to uncovering it. Who was the man I saw? Why was he standing by the grave? Was he connected to what Elias had written about, or was there something more to this mystery than I had yet realized? The questions lingered in my mind as I made my way back inside, my thoughts racing. I could not ignore what had happened, nor could I shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than I had anticipated. The days after seeing the figure near the grave were filled with unease. I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was subtle at first, like a soft pressure in the back of my mind, but over the next few days, it became more intense. I would catch glimpses of something just out of the corner of my eye, a shadow that seemed to move when I was not looking. The house, once a quiet sanctuary, now felt like it was alive, breathing with its own rhythm, its own pulse. The strangest part was how it affected the rest of the house. The rooms I had always felt comfortable in, like the living room and the study, now felt foreign, as though they were no longer meant for me. There were moments when I would hear faint whispers coming from nowhere, and the air would grow thick with an unexplainable heaviness. The house seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to carry on with my normal routine, pushing the thoughts of the figure and the grave to the back of my mind, but every night I found myself staring out the window, waiting for something. The fog had returned, rolling in thick and heavy, just like the night the figure had appeared. I had convinced myself that I had imagined it, that it was just my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew that was not the case. I had seen the figure. I had felt the presence. And now, it was clear that something was beginning to unfold. One evening, after another restless night, I decided I could not ignore it anymore. I needed answers. I could no longer just wait for things to happen. I had to go back to the grave. I had to confront whatever was hiding there, whatever the house was trying to show me. There was no way around it. I stepped outside, the cool air biting at my skin as I walked toward the grave. The yard was shrouded in thick fog, the stone barely visible against the darkened backdrop of the trees. The grave stood there, unmoving, silent, but to me, it felt like it was watching. Waiting. I could hear my own breath echoing in my ears, the only sound in the quiet yard. As I stood in front of the stone, I could not shake the feeling that something was different. The air was still, yet it felt charged with anticipation. I ran my fingers along the surface of the stone, feeling the coolness of the weathered stone under my touch. The symbols were clearer now, their edges sharp and defined, but I still could not make sense of them. I had tried looking up the symbols in every book I could find, but they did not match anything I knew. There was something deeply unsettling about the feeling they gave me. As if they were meant to keep something hidden. That was when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, but the yard was empty. There was no one there. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Perhaps it was just the wind, or my own mind playing tricks on me again. But the unease in my chest told me otherwise. The footsteps had been real, and they had come from behind me. I turned back toward the grave, trying to calm my nerves. The whispers began again, faint at first, then growing louder, until they were a constant hum in my ears. I could not make out the words, but the tone was clear, something was trying to get my attention. Something wanted me to listen. I could feel my pulse quicken as I took a step back. The whispers were getting louder, the air growing colder with every passing second. It was as if the grave itself was alive, calling out to me, demanding that I uncover what had been hidden for so long. I knew, then, that I had reached the point of no return. There was no turning back. I had to keep going. But what was I going to find? Was it the spirit of the person buried there, trying to communicate something, or was it something far more sinister? And why had the presence seemed to grow stronger with each passing day? These were questions I had no answers to, but I knew that the truth was waiting. But what would happen when I finally uncovered it? What had been hidden in this house for so long, and what would I face when I finally found the answers? I stood there, frozen, as the whispers grew louder, more urgent, almost frantic. It felt like the grave itself was trying to pull me in, drawing me closer to uncover something I was not ready to face. My heart pounded in my chest, the fog swirling around me as if it was alive, making every movement feel slow, deliberate. I had crossed a line. I could feel it. There was no going back now. The grave had already haunted my thoughts for days, but now, standing so close, I realized I could not ignore it any longer. The whispers were not just in my mind. They were real, coming from deep within the earth, as if the ground itself was alive, trying to communicate with me. The air around me felt thick, the weight of something ancient pressing down on me, suffocating me. I had been drawn here for a reason. But I did not understand why. I took a deep breath, the cold air biting at my skin, and slowly crouched down next to the grave. I ran my fingers along the stone again, but this time, I felt something different, a faint warmth under my touch, like the stone was alive, as though it was reacting to my presence. My pulse quickened. This was not just any grave. It was something much more. I could feel it in my bones. I turned my attention to the symbols once more. They had been confusing before, but now, they seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. As my fingers traced the shapes, I realized something. It was not just the symbols that were important. It was the placement of the stone itself. The grave had been positioned at the very edge of the yard, directly outside my window. It was almost as if it had been placed there to watch over me, to be within my sight at all times. Why had no one mentioned it? Why had it been hidden from me for so long? I knew I had to do more than just stare at the grave. I had to find out what was buried there, what was so important that it had been kept a secret for so long. I stepped back and looked around, scanning the yard for any sign of something that might explain the strange feeling, the sense that something was not quite right. And that is when I saw it. A faint outline in the soil, partially covered by leaves and dirt. I bent down and brushed away the debris, revealing a small, rusted key. It was old, the metal corroded by years of neglect, but it was unmistakably a key. A key to something. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it, and a thought struck me like a lightning bolt. The house. This house. There had to be a hidden room, a hidden place that only the key could open. A place that had been locked away for years, maybe decades. It was the only explanation for the feeling that had been gnawing at me. This grave, the figure I had seen, the whispers, they were all connected. And I was about to uncover something that could change everything. I walked back to the house, the key clutched tightly in my hand. The house loomed over me, its windows dark and lifeless. I had never felt the house so oppressive, so heavy. It was as if the walls were closing in on me, warning me not to go any further. But I had to. I had no choice. I made my way to the cellar, where I had never ventured before. The door creaked open, revealing the darkness below. The air was thick, damp with the smell of old wood and earth. I descended the stairs, my hand shaking slightly as I held the key. The cellar was cold, colder than I had ever remembered. The walls were lined with shelves of forgotten boxes, old furniture, and dust. But there was something else, something I could not ignore. A door, partially obscured by shadows and cobwebs, stood at the far end of the cellar. It was not like the other doors. It was old, with a heavy lock that seemed out of place. And there, at the center of the lock, was a keyhole. I walked toward the door, my steps echoing in the silence of the cellar. I knew what I had to do. I inserted the key into the lock, and as I turned it, a sharp click echoed through the room. The door creaked open, revealing what lay behind it. But as the door swung wide, I was hit with a wave of cold air, and I stepped back, my heart pounding. What was behind the door? What had been hidden for so long, waiting for me to find it? And why had the house kept this secret from me? The answers were waiting, but they were more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. I had crossed a line, that much was certain. The feeling in the house had changed, shifted into something I could no longer ignore. The strange presence, the whispers, the figure outside the window, they were all connected to this house, and now I was in the cellar, staring at a door I had never noticed before. The air was colder down here, thick with dust and the smell of something ancient, like a forgotten part of the house had been sealed off for years, just waiting for me to find it. I did not know why I had been drawn here, but the moment I inserted the key into the lock, I knew there was no turning back. The door creaked open, the sound echoing down the dark corridor of the cellar, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The space beyond was small, cramped, and dim, with only a sliver of light creeping in from the stairs. The floor was covered in layers of dust, the walls lined with shelves that hadn't been touched in what seemed like forever. But it was the table in the center of the room that caught my attention. It was old, the wood faded and cracked, but what lay on top of it stopped me in my tracks. A book, bound in leather, its pages yellowed with age. It looked out of place, too deliberate in the way it had been left there. My heart began to race. There was no way this was an accident. The house had been holding this secret for a reason, and now, I had found it. I moved closer to the table, every step feeling heavier, as if the house itself was trying to keep me from uncovering whatever lay in that book. My fingers shook as I reached for it, lifting it slowly from the table. The moment I touched it, a coldness spread through my hands, as if the book was absorbing my warmth. I opened it carefully, the pages stiff and fragile, and I began to read. The writing inside was strange, dense, with symbols I had never seen before. The more I read, the more I realized this was no ordinary book. It was a record, a history of something darker, something tied directly to the grave outside my window. I turned the pages quickly, feeling my breath quicken with every word, every symbol. The book described rituals, ancient ones, and the grave, the one I had discovered, was not just a resting place. It was part of something far bigger, something that had been set in motion long before I had arrived. The more I read, the more it became clear that the house itself was built on top of something dark, something buried deep beneath the surface. The book spoke of a curse, one that had been placed upon the land long ago, and it seemed to be tied to whoever occupied the house. I began to understand. The house, the grave, the symbols, they were all part of a larger pattern. But the book did not just speak of a curse. It spoke of a promise, one made long ago, to someone who had been buried outside my window. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The deeper I read, the more I realized this was not just history, it was a warning. A warning to stay away, to leave the house and never return. But I had already crossed that line. I could not turn back now. The truth was in front of me, hidden in these pages, and I had to know it. I slammed the book shut, my hands trembling. The silence in the room was deafening. The house felt colder, darker, and I could feel the weight of something pressing in on me. I had uncovered something that was never meant to be uncovered. The curse had been waiting for someone to unlock its secret, and I had just become that person. But what would I find next? What had been hidden in this house for so long, and what would happen now that I had unearthed it? The house was waiting for me to finish what had been started. The question was I ready for what came next? What did the curse mean for me, and how far would it reach? I stood in the cellar, the weight of the book heavy in my hands, feeling its coldness seep into my skin. The room around me seemed to close in, and I knew that I had reached the point where there was no turning back. The house, which had always been familiar, now felt like a stranger. Every shadow, every creak of the floor, felt different. The house had secrets, and I had just uncovered one of them. The book had given me answers, answers I was not ready for. I had thought that I was searching for some explanation, something that would make sense of the grave outside my window. But now, holding that ancient book, I realized I had been looking for something much bigger. The grave was just the beginning. What I had found went deeper than I could have imagined. The symbols on the stone outside the window, the strange occurrences that had followed me around the house, they were all tied to something older than I could fathom. The book spoke of a curse that had been placed long ago, tied to the very land this house stood on. The grave was a part of it, yes, but it was more than that. It was a marker, a warning, something that had been waiting for me to come along and uncover the truth. I felt my hands tremble as I turned the pages. The more I read, the more it became clear, this house was not just a house. It was a part of something much darker. The grave was placed outside my window for a reason, and it was not just some forgotten relic of the past. It was connected to the land, to the house, to everything that had happened here before me. And now, it was my turn to face it. I had always felt a pull to this house, something that made me stay even when I had the chance to leave. Now, I understood why. The house had been waiting for someone to uncover its truth. But the truth was not a simple one. The book mentioned a ritual, a way to break the curse, but it came with a price. The curse had been placed to bind the house, to keep whatever dark force lived here from escaping. But it could only be undone if someone was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. I closed the book slowly, the words still echoing in my mind. The sacrifice. The price. It was all connected. The more I thought about it, the more I understood. The grave outside my window wasn't just a resting place. It was a place where something had been buried, something that needed to stay buried. The house had been built on this land, on this cursed ground, and now I was part of it. The curse was not something I could escape. I walked to the window, looking out at the grave again. The fog had rolled in once more, just like it had the first night I saw the grave. It was hard to see clearly through the thick mist, but I could make out the faint outline of the stone. It seemed to stand there, waiting for me. I did not know what to do next. Part of me wanted to run, to leave it all behind and never look back. But I knew I could not. The house, the grave, the curse, they had all found me. They were part of me now. I stood there for a long time, thinking about the choice I had to make. The truth was right in front of me. But could I face it? Could I really make the sacrifice the house demanded? I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me, and for the first time since I moved into this house, I understood what it meant to be trapped. Not just by the house, but by the past. The past that I had uncovered, the past that had never been allowed to rest. I knew one thing for certain, I could not ignore this any longer. I had to confront it. The house was not going to let me go, not unless I faced the truth. But what was the truth? And what would it cost me to finally set it free? If you want to know what happens when I face the truth, when I make the decision that will either break the curse or destroy me, like this video and subscribe. I had reached a point where there was no turning back. The house, the grave, the curse, it was all connected in a way that I could no longer ignore. I had spent so many nights lying awake, staring at that grave outside my window, wondering how I had ended up here, wondering how this house had come to choose me. But now, standing in the dim light of my room, I realized that it was no longer a question of whether I could escape. The real question was what I was willing to face to end it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had always been part of this story. The house had been waiting for someone to come, someone who could uncover its secrets and face the darkness that had been hidden here for so long. The grave was not just a place of burial. It was a mark. A point in time that had been left untouched, left to wait until the right person arrived. And now, that person was me. I could not shake the image of the figure I had seen in the fog, standing there, watching. He had not been a ghost, not in the way I had first imagined. He was a part of this house, a part of the history that had never been allowed to rest. He was tied to the curse, just like everything else. The journal, the book, the grave, they all spoke of a sacrifice. A decision that needed to be made. I had read it over and over, trying to find some way around it, some way to escape without facing the consequences. But there was no escape. The house was not going to let me go. It had chosen me, and now it was time to face the truth. I walked to the window, the fog thicker now than it had been before. The grave stood there, barely visible in the darkness, but I could feel it. I could feel the weight of it pressing against me, pulling me closer. I did not know if I was ready to make the sacrifice that the curse demanded, but I knew one thing: if I did not do it, I would be trapped here forever, bound to this house, bound to this curse. The stone outside my window had always felt like a barrier, something that separated the past from the present, the living from the dead. But now, I understood that it was not a barrier at all. It was a bridge, a connection between two worlds, between the house's dark history and the truth I had uncovered. I had spent so long trying to ignore it, but the truth was undeniable. The house, the grave, the curse, they were all a part of me now. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking as I reached for the door. I had to go outside, had to face it. There was no other choice. The grave, the sacrifice, it was all connected. I could feel the weight of it in my chest, the pull of the earth beneath me, as though the grave was calling me. As though it was waiting for me to do what needed to be done. I walked into the yard, the fog swirling around my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. The grave was there, just a few steps away, but it felt like an eternity. I stood there for a long moment, my thoughts racing. I had no idea what was going to happen, what I would find when I finally uncovered the truth. But I knew that whatever it was, it would change everything. I knelt beside the grave, the stone cold beneath my fingers. I could feel the energy, the pull of something dark beneath me. The whispers returned, louder now, more urgent. They were coming from the grave, from the earth itself, calling me to finish what had been started. I reached down, my fingers trembling as I touched the ground. The earth was soft, as though it had been disturbed recently. I dug, my hands shaking, my breath quickening as I uncovered the hidden box. The same box I had found before, the one buried beneath the grave. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding, and inside, I found the stone, the one that had been placed there for me to find. It hummed in my hand, warm against my skin, as though it had been waiting for me. The whispers grew louder, surrounding me, filling the air. It was time. I had uncovered the truth. But now, I had to decide. Would I complete the ritual, break the curse, and sacrifice what was needed to end it all? Or would I leave the house, the grave, and the curse behind, knowing it would never truly be over? I held the stone in my hand, feeling its weight, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. The house had been waiting for me, but the question remained, was I ready to make the sacrifice? The moment I held the stone in my hand, everything around me seemed to shift. The weight of it was no longer just in my palm, it felt as if the house itself was pressing down on me. The air was thick with the years of secrets that had been buried here, the quiet whispers of the past now hanging in the stillness. I could feel the pressure, like something was waiting, something was about to happen. The stone had been the key all along, and now it was time to face what that meant. I had read every word in that book, every symbol on the grave, and yet nothing had prepared me for the reality of what I was about to do. The ritual, the curse, it was all tied to this place. But what would happen once the ritual was complete? Would the house be free? Would I be free? I stepped closer to the window, looking out at the grave. It had always been there, just outside my room, and yet, in a way, I had never truly seen it until now. I had spent so many nights lying awake, wondering about it, fearing it, but now I knew. It was not just a grave. It was a boundary, a threshold between the past and the present. And I had to cross it. With the stone still clutched in my hand, I walked outside. The fog had lifted somewhat, but the night still held a quiet weight, as if everything was waiting for me to make the first move. The grave stood just a few feet away, its stone dark and weathered. I had already uncovered the truth, but now I had to finish it. It was not about breaking the curse anymore. It was about finding peace, for the house, for the past, and for me. I knelt beside the grave, my hands shaking slightly as I placed the stone on the earth. The ground felt cold beneath my fingers, the soil damp and heavy. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was the moment I had been building up to, the moment when everything would either fall apart or come together. I closed my eyes, recalling the words from the book, the ritual that had been passed down, the sacrifices made. It was not about who had lived here before or what had been buried. It was about what I needed to do next, about finally closing this chapter in my life. I placed my hands on the stone, and for a brief moment, I could feel something shift beneath me. It was as though the ground itself had exhaled, as if the weight of the house had been released. I did not feel the intense pull I had expected, no overwhelming presence. Instead, it was quiet, peaceful, even. The fog lifted entirely, and for the first time since moving into the house, I felt like I could breathe. When I stood up and looked around, the house seemed different. The air no longer felt thick with dread, no longer suffocating. It was as if the house had been holding its breath, waiting for me to make this choice. The weight I had felt pressing on me was gone, replaced by a strange sense of relief. It was over. The curse had been lifted, not by some grand, mystical act, but by the simple act of facing it and accepting it. The grave, the stone, the ritual, it had all been a part of this house's story. And now that story was done. There was nothing more to uncover, no more secrets left buried beneath the surface. The house could rest. And I could finally rest too. I turned away from the grave, walking back to the house. The fog was gone, and the night seemed less oppressive. The house that had once felt like a place of mystery and dread now felt like a home again. For the first time since I had moved in, I did not feel like a visitor. I felt like I belonged here. I had broken the curse, not by undoing the past, but by accepting it. And in doing so, I had found my peace. If you have watched this video till the very end, it means you have experienced this journey with me. This story deserves your like and subscribe to keep uncovering more mysteries. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and stay tuned for more stories like this.